Hello, this is Mrs. Standridge. I'm glad you're here to join me for another episode of Raymie Nightingale by Kate DiCamillo. So we'd been wondering why the book was titled Raymie Nightingale when the main character's name is Raymie Clark. But in our last reading, we found out that Raymie is going to be reading to a lady at a nursing home, and the book she's going to be reading is a book about Florence Nightingale, who was a famous nurse during the Civil War. Let's go ahead and see what we can find out next. 14. I couldn't care less about Florence Nightingale, said Isabelle as Raymie pushed her wheelchair down a long hallway lined with closed doors. Do-gooders don't interest me. They are the least interesting people on the planet. And Florence Nightingale was a do-gooder if there ever was one. Okay, said Raymie, because she couldn't think of anything else to say. Also, it was hard to talk. She was out of breath from pushing the wheelchair. Isabelle was heavier than she looked. Faster, said Isabelle. What? Said Raymie. Go faster, said Isabelle. Raymie tried to push the wheelchair faster. She could feel little pinpricks of sweat on her upper lip. Her arms hurt. So did her legs. Take my hand, shouted a terrible voice from behind one of the closed doors. What was that? Said Raymie. She stopped pushing the wheelchair. What are you doing? Said Isabelle. Why are you stopping? Take my hand, screamed the voice again. Raymie's heart jumped up high in her chest and then sank down low. Who is that? Asked Raymie. That's Alice Nebely, said Isabelle. Ignore her. She knows one sentence and she says it day and night. The monotony of her request is too horrible to bear. To Raymie, the voice didn't sound like it belonged to someone named Alice. Instead, it sounded like the voice of a troll who was standing under a bridge, hoping that an unsuspecting billy goat would walk by. Raymie's heart was pounding somewhere deep inside of her now. It felt as if it had moved position permanently, from her chest to her stomach. She thought how nice it would be if she were like Beverly Topinski and afraid of nothing. Raymie took a deep breath and started to push the wheelchair again. That's right, said Isabelle. The trick is to keep moving. Never stop moving. 15. Isabelle's room had a single bed in it and a rocking chair and a nightstand with a clock on it. There was an Afghan on the rocking chair. The walls were painted white. The clock was ticking very loudly. Should I sit down? Asked Raymie. What do I care? Said Isabelle. Raymie sat in the rocking chair, but she held herself very still. It didn't seem like a good time to rock. Should I read to you now? She asked. She held up Florence Nightingale. Do not, said Isabelle. Read to me from that book. Okay, said Raymie. She flexed her toes. She tried to isolate her objectives, but for the life of her she couldn't think of what to do next. Should she just leave? Take my hand, shouted Alice Nebely. The voice was not as loud as it had been in the hallway, but it was still loud enough to make Raymie jump. This place, said Isabelle. And then, from far away, there came the sound of music. It was beautiful, sad music. Someone was playing the piano. For some reason, the song made Raymie think of the Flying Elefantes, whoever they were, and their luggage. I can't stand it, said Isabelle. She put her head in her hands. Should I go? Asked Raymie. Isabelle raised her head and narrowed her eyes. Can you write? Write? Said Raymie. Letters, said Isabelle. Words. On a piece of paper. She balled up her fist and pounded it on the arm of the wheelchair. Can you put words on paper? Oh, the frustration of this world. Yes, said Raymie. Good, said Isabelle. Get the notepad from the top drawer of the nightstand, and the pen. You write what I say, exactly what I say. Was writing for someone a good deed? It had to be. Raymie got up and retrieved the pen and the notepad. She sat back down. To the management, said Isabelle. Raymie looked at her. Write it, said Isabelle, pounding her fist on the wheelchair arm again. Write it, write it. Take my hand, shouted Alice Nebley. Raymie bent her head. She wrote, to the management. Her hand was shaking. There is entirely too much Chopin played in this establishment, said Isabelle. Raymie looked up. Write that too, said Isabelle. A long silence prevailed in the room. I don't know how to spell Chopin, said Raymie finally. What do they teach you in those schools? Said Isabelle. This, Raymie knew, was another impossible, unanswerable adult question. She waited. He was a musician, said Isabelle, an entirely too gloomy one. Chopin is a proper name, therefore it begins with a capital C and is followed by a lowercase h. And so they continued. By the end, Raymie had written a letter of complaint for Isabelle, detailing how the Golden Glen janitor played the wrong kind of music on the common room piano. According to Isabelle, the music of Chopin was too mournful, and the janitor needed to stop playing it because the world was mournful enough on its own. The Golden Glen, in particular, was too mournful to be borne, according to Isabelle. It was a very long letter. And when Raymie was done writing it, Isabelle made Raymie push her wheelchair out of the room and down the hallway and back to the common room, where the floor was just a floor and not a glowing lake, and where there was a wooden box with the word suggestions printed on its side in silver stick-on letters. Drop it in, said Isabelle. Me? Said Raymie. You wrote it, didn't you? Said Isabelle. Raymie put the letter in the box. There, said Isabelle. You wanted to do a good deed. You did a good deed. Writing a letter of complaint about mournful music didn't seem like a good deed at all. It seemed like the opposite of a good deed. Take me back to my room, said Isabelle. I've had enough. Raymie thought that she had had enough too. She turned the wheelchair around and headed back to Isabelle's room. Take my hand, shouted Alice Nebley as they made their way down the hallway. Close the door when you leave, said Isabelle after Raymie had wheeled her into her room, and do not return. I am not interested in people doing good deeds. Good deeds are pointless in any case. Nothing changes. Nothing matters. The sun was trying to make its way through the one small window in Isabelle's room. Raymie stood in the doorway, holding Florence close to her chest, as if the book could protect her, which it couldn't, of course. She knew that. Everything seemed bleak, impossible. Archie, I'm sorry I betrayed you, said Raymie without really meaning to say it. Yes, well, poor Archie, alas, Archie, and alas your betrayal of him, said Isabelle, whoever he is. He's a cat, said Raymie. Isabelle stared at Raymie with her bright blue eyes. Is that why you wanted to do a good deed, because you betrayed a cat? No, said Raymie, my father left. And? I'm working to get him back, said Raymie. With good deeds? Said Isabelle. Yes, said Raymie. Maybe it was because of Isabelle's X-ray vision, or maybe it was because of her lack of sympathy. For some reason, Raymie told Isabelle the truth. I'm going to win a contest, and then I will be famous, and he will see my picture in the paper, and he will have to come home. I see, said Isabelle. Just then, the sun managed to come around the corner of Isabelle's window and throw itself into a small square of light on the floor. It was very bright. It shimmered. It looked like the window to another universe. Look, said Raymie. She pointed at the sun patch. I see, said Isabelle. I see. 16. Take my hand, shouted Alice Nebley as Raymie walked down the hallway. Raymie stopped. She listened. She flexed her toes, and then she started walking again. She followed the sound of Alice's voice. Raymie needed to do a good deed, plus she needed to make up for the bad deed she had just done. That meant she had to do the bravest, best deed she could think of, the deed she least wanted to do. She had to go into Alice Nebley's room and ask her if she wanted to be read to. It was a terrifying prospect. Raymie looked down at her feet. She made herself put one foot in front of the other. She concentrated on Alice's voice. The voice led her to a door with the number 323 on it, and underneath the number was a white card. Alice Nebley was written on the card in black ink. The letters of the name were shaky and uncertain, like maybe Alice Nebley had written them herself. Raymie flexed her toes. She knocked. And when no one answered, Raymie took a deep breath, grabbed the doorknob and turned it, then stepped inside. The room was dark, but Raymie could see that someone was in the bed. "Mrs. Nebley?" whispered Raymie. There was no answer. Raymie stepped farther into the room. "Mrs. Nebley?" she said again, a little louder this time. She could hear whoever was in the bed breathing in a raspy, strangled kind of way. Said Raymie, "I'm here to do a good deed. Would you like to hear about a bright and shining path and, Florence Nightingale? Mrs. Nebley?" "Arrgh!" screamed Alice Nebley. It was the most terrifying noise Raymie had ever heard in her life. It was a sound of pure pain, pure need. Alice Nebley's scream pierced something inside of Raymie. She felt her soul whoosh away into nothingness. "I cannot!" shouted Alice Nebley. "Give me!" A hand rose out of the covers. It was reaching for something. It was reaching for her, Raymie Clark. Raymie jumped, and a bright and shining path, the life of Florence Nightingale, leaped out of her hands and flew into the air and skittered under Alice Nebley's bed. Raymie screamed. Alice Nebley screamed back. "Arrgh! I cannot bear the pain. Take my hand." Her hand was still extended, reaching out of the covers, searching. "Please, please, take my hand." Raymie Clark turned and ran. Raymie stood for a long time on the sidewalk in front of the Golden Glen, flexing her toes and isolating her objectives. She had to get the book back. That was her one true objective right now. It was a library book. Edward Option would be very disappointed in her if she didn't return it. She hadn't even read it, and that would disappoint him too. And there would be fines, overdue fines. What if she had to pay for the book? But she couldn't go back into Alice Nebley's room. She truly didn't know if she was brave enough to ever enter the Golden Glen again. She thought about Isabelle's X-ray eyes. She thought about Alice Nebley's hand. She thought about gigantic seabirds that snatched babies from their mother's arms. And then she heard Beverly Topinski's voice. "Fear is a big waste of time. I'm not afraid of anything." Beverly. Beverly Topinski and her pocket knife. Beverly, who was afraid of nothing. Raymie knew, suddenly, what her objective was. She would find Beverly and ask her to help get Florence Nightingale back. All right, we're going to stop right there. We'll continue with Raymie Nightingale tomorrow, and I hope that you can join me then. Bye.